the assurance that we can know that we are the children of God, especially in the times of trial and opposition and difficulty. That's chapter 2 and all the way to chapter 4. And then the assurances of the Holy Spirit, found in chapter 5. Then the assurances come by faith in the Son of God and through prayer. That's also in chapter 5. But here, the passage that I read to you, we can call this the assurances of God's love and the guarantee that we are the children of God if we love others. Notice in verse 16, so we have come to know and believe the love that God has for us. Do you believe that love? The word here, for, has for us, technically in the Greek, is the word in. That God has not just for us, but has in us. In our hearts, in our lives. God is love, and whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. And he says in verse 8, anyone who does not love, you don't know God. That love that you have toward others indicates you know God. And if you can't love others, then you don't know God. Why? Because God is love. So, what does this all mean? How does this truth affect us? I'm going to just look at that phrase, God is love, because of my time. Or that statement, that God is love. Let me point out a couple of things. First of all, so that there is no misunderstanding. The statement here, God is love, literally in the Greek, the God love is. I'm going to elaborate on that in just a few minutes. But just so you understand, the God love is how it technically is in the Greek New Testament. But let me point out, first of all, this is not a statement giving to us characteristics about God, like he's loving, or he's gracious, or he is merciful. This is not giving us a characteristic. It is declaring to us what or who God is, pointing out the very essence of God. And the way it is put, the God love is. The verb is put at the end because the emphasis on God love. God love. Let me just give you an illustration here, for example. God knows. He's all-knowing, isn't he? He knows all things, but we would not say God is knowledge, would we? We probably wouldn't say it that way, or say that. Or we know that he has power, and he's all-powerful, but we would not say that God is power. Or we know that he's fair and he's just, but we would not say God is justice. But we do say God is love. The statement is concise. The statement is clear. It is emphatic. Since he, as a being in his essence, is talking about, or in his very being, in his essence, he is love. He must and he will love. In other words, he cannot get to the point he says, I can't love. No, he must love. Why? Because that is part of his very essence and his very being. That is what John is saying here. In other words, it is in his nature to love at all times. He will never, ever, ever stop loving because he can't stop himself, is what it means. His very essence is love. In other words, let me say it this way. Sometimes God rebukes, but he doesn't always rebuke. Or sometimes God judges, but he doesn't always judge. Or sometimes he delays, but he doesn't always delay. Or sometimes he shows wrath, but he doesn't always show wrath. But I tell you what, he shows love all the time, is what this statement is saying. All the time. It's like somebody keeping on a light all the time, 24 hours a day. And sometimes you say, I wish they'd turn it off so I can get some sleep. But it's on all the time. It never stops. It keeps going on. His rebukes are loving rebukes. His denials are loving denials. His judgments are loving judgments. Why? Because he is love. He has to do it. He has to love. He cannot do anything but love. God is the only being that we can say this about. Can't say this about you. Can't say this about myself. We don't always love, we have to admit, but God does. And he can and he must manifest himself. Notice in verse 7, this love that we have from him as a gift is manifested through us toward others. This does not only show that we are believers, but it shows that God is reaching out to a lonely, desperate world. A hungry world that wants touch, wants love, wants to get in contact with the truth, the living God. Notice in verse 7, for example. Beloved, let us love one another. Why? Because love is from God as a source. And whoever loves has been born of God. He's that source. You've been born from him. And you know him. Now the Greek word here for know means to know experientially, to know personally. Not just to know about him, but I know him. Anyone who does not love does not know God. Why? Because God is love. And then also notice verses 11 and 12. If God so loved, we also to love one another. And no one has ever seen God. If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love is perfected in us. That love that he has for us can be perfected in us. Now, let me go back to the statement here once again. God is love in verse 8 and also in verse 16. There's another thing I would like to bring to your attention. And that is, this statement here does not have two subjects. They say, oh, now you're talking about grammar. Well, I won't spend a lot of time, but I just want to illustrate the point. Does not have two subjects. Because I told you before, how is it literally in the Greek? It is the God love is. Now notice I did not say the God the love is. Now, if love had a definite article, then you would have a trouble here. We'd have two subjects. But we don't. We only have one subject. Love here in this case is what we call a predicate noun. God is love. Giving a statement showing what he is in his very essence. In other words, the noun here, it cannot be interchanged. I cannot say love is God. I can't twist it around. I cannot say light is God. I cannot say air or substance is God. All three of those statements, that would be pantheism. That's what pantheists believe. That God is the universe, or God is the world, or the sun and everything else. That's God. No, God is love. That being said, God is teaching us that God is the only source of this true love. So, where are you going for love? You only can go to God. And it is this love which we all hunger for and we long for. And so therefore it's not found in the world. It's not found in the things of this world. It's not found in fame or fortune or what people give to us or from education or politics or anything else or through good works. It can and ought to be seen and manifested through us. This love only comes from God. Notice in verse 19, I didn't read this and following. Verses 19 through verse 21. We love because what? He first loved us. So you can't love this way until God first loves you. This cannot be worked up in the flesh. This cannot be worked up, well, I'm going to go do this. No, this is a divine love that he gives to us so that we can do it. Incidentally, men, this is the love that is used here. You to love your wife. It's a love of the will. It's a love of choice. It may not be easy, but you do it. You love. Husbands, love your wives. It's the same word here. The Greek word, oh, but you don't know my wife. Oh, I don't, but that's what it says. Love your wife. Notice in verse 20, if anyone says, I love God, but hates his brother, if you have something wrong with a Christian brother or someone else, then don't talk to me, to talk to God. There's something wrong with your love. He is a liar, for he does not love his brother whom he has seen. How can he love God whom he has not seen? How can you say I love God and then turn around and you can't love your brother? Well, you don't know what my brother did to me. Well, you leave that with the Lord. But you do your part. Go to them, get things settled, and maybe he won't accept it or she won't accept it, but still you do your part and you leave that with the Lord. And this commandment we have from him, whoever loves God must must love his brother. You have no choice in this. You have to love. Because it's God's nature to love. You can't stop it. It's like, saying, okay, I want all of you to hold your breath for 20 minutes. Well, I can't do that. I just have to breathe. It's just natural. You do it. When you know God and you know Him, that He is love, and He's worked it in your life, you got to love. Do you manifest this love toward others, even the unlovely? Also, this being said, that He is the only true source of love, or this love, God must and wants to manifest it in your life. And He wants to, first of all, manifest it in your life by sending His Son, verses 9, 10, and 14. He sent His Son into the world, demonstrating His love. He shows it by taking away our fears. He tells it by taking away our worries and our doubts. How? With His love. Keep your place here and turn with me to an Old Testament book. It's a small book. It's called Zephaniah. You might say, where is Zephaniah? Well, you can got in the front. You can use your, look at where the table of contents is. Or it's between two books that start with H. Haggai is just before that. And Haggai is just before Zechariah. So I'm trying to help you here. While you're trying to find Zephaniah, let me just briefly talk about Zephaniah. He prophesied during the reforms in the reign of a man called King Josiah. 640 to 609, Josiah ruled and reigned. The book primarily talks about God's judgment, specifically on Judah. They have been so blessed. They have been warned and given. No nation in the world had received so many blessings like Israel, and especially like Judah. I mean, China hadn't. India hadn't. Other nations hadn't. But, Paul points that out in Romans. Romans chapter 10 and places. That, look at what we have received. We received the tablets. We received, revelation. We received the scriptures. We have prophets and all these things. We've been so blessed, and they turned away. And so, God's judgment is near. And in chapter 2, he talks about judgment on Israel or Judah's enemies. And then once again, he talks about in chapter 3, judgment on the city of Jerusalem and nations. But at the very end of this book, beginning in verse 14, he talks about eventually, ultimately, Israel will rejoice, and they will be restored. There will be restoration for Israel. And I'm going to read, beginning in verse 14 of chapter 3 of Zephaniah. Sing aloud, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O Israel. Rejoice and exult with all your heart, O daughter of Jerusalem. The Lord has taken away the judgments against you. He has cleared away your enemies. The King of Israel